Hello and welcome to Retroformat Live Q&A. I'm your host, Sean P. Malone, cinematographer and proud board member at Retroformat Silent Films. We're an LA-based nonprofit dedicated to keeping the art and history of silent cinema alive. Tonight, I am thrilled to have a guest here. His name is Jose Stathes, and he is here to talk to us about these wonderful cartoons that we've just watched and animation shorts. Tommy is a historian, he's an archivist, and he's an expert in the field of early animation. So Tommy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're so excited to have you here.
Thanks very much, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. I love your background. Immediately, I'm ready to just kind of let go and have fun, with all those cartoon characters.
That's the point of cartoons, I think. Let go and have a little bit of fun, right? A little bit of escapism. I have some artifacts around me, including a poster that I made for the very first public film screening I ever put on in 2009. And this is my pandemic era stage at home on my little love seat here. So you're getting to see where I put on some shows online and also do some online remote teaching now instead of being in the classroom.
Yeah, I love it. So let's start there. So our president, Retroformat's president, Tom Barnes, has been showing silent films to audiences around LA for about 10 years now. And you've been doing something very similar, of course, pre-pandemic. So tell me about maybe tell me how that started, and then after that we can go way back and you can tell me, how this all started.
For the past 11 years, roughly, or a little bit more now, I'd been doing a variety of public screenings, most of which were part of one specific series called the Cartoon Carnival, and that showcases my 16 millimeter film print collection. I've also been doing a lot of other one-off type events or special events that use the films that I work with but are not necessarily part of that series. The Cartoon Carnival, however, that began when I was a college student, and I had already at that point amassed quite a number of 16 millimeter film prints of these early silent cartoons and a lot of classic sound era animation that I personally liked a lot.
Yeah.
So as a teenager, I guess starting as a preteen even, I became very heavily interested in collecting film prints as a way to find copies of these early cartoons that were elusive or possibly even lost, things that had not been distributed for many decades or put out on home video or anything like that. So by the time I was in college, I had built up quite a number of these prints and decided that there have to be other people out there who want to see these things, especially in real film form with a real film projector. And especially my being in New York City, I think that gave me a good opportunity to put something on for the general public and see what kind of response I would get to that. It has been an what's the word? An itinerant film series. I'll show up to different locations, storefronts, all different places, and just bring a film projector and we put on a screening there.
Right.
So it had a very grassroots kind of organic, low maintenance feel to it and growth. And over a decade later, it finally has something of a big following. And I've been able to show a lot of strange, rare, early silent cartoons that way. And a lot of classic sound golden age animation that I personally love. Also, when we can, we have live music for the silent films, courtesy of my friend Charlie Judkins, a pianist. So that's a lot of fun, obviously.
I've shared this before on our little show, but I got obsessed with Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney and film noir when I was 17 years old, and from there it just became a cascade of going further back and back and back until you basically can't go back any further anymore. So I totally relate to what you're saying, and believe me, completely, and kind of in respect and awe of it. I want to talk to you a little bit about the shorts we saw tonight, and I know we programmed, I guess, 5 shorts, so maybe can't go too deeply into all of them, but maybe real quickly, I'll run down the list and you could tell us a little more about these characters and these shorts. So the Haunted Hotel, that was our first short tonight. So what can you tell us about the Haunted Hotel?
Haunted Hotel was produced and directed, probably filmed for the most part, somewhat, by James Stewart Blackton, who ran the Vitagraph Company in Brooklyn, New York. This was a prominent early film studio. It started in the late 1890s, and he was successful in the film industry for, I would say, a couple decades. Blackton is incredibly important in the early history of animation because he's one of the first people to take the idea of stop action photography and photograph sequential images that are drawings or still objects and animating them. Other people like Georges Méliès in France had understood shooting errors or camera tricks to manipulate things, but Blackton was one of the first people to animate with sequential images of still objects or still drawings. And in the Haunted Hotel film, it's a great early example of horror as a genre and as a short, novelty trick film. But it's fascinating to me for being one of these very early examples of showcasing stop motion animation with this little clown doll that runs around in one sequence and creates havoc on the dinner table there in the film.
And also we see that lovely mix of live action with animation, and we saw that quite a bit here tonight, including in Coco Sees Spooks. Was the Coco character, was that a very popular character at that time?
Yeah, Coco is what I would call one of the 2 superstars of the 1920s in animation. We've seen both of them in tonight's program, Coco and Felix the cat. These were 2 of the first cartoon characters that I would say achieved fan bases and worldwide popularity, and made animation into not only a very popular medium, but a very profitable one too. This was the height of understanding that we can produce animated cartoons on a regular basis with a studio system. We can distribute them, and it's a cycle that just keeps feeding off of itself. And Coco was definitely a part of that new frontier of creating a recurring character and a recurring series, and getting a fan base together for that.
Right.
That, of course, that series relied initially on rotoscoping, so tracing live action actors and animating it. But by the time we get to the mid-20s, the Coco character has been redesigned and stylized and animated in a more straight way. But certainly an incredibly popular and significant series in early animation, Coco.
And next up we have Mutt and Jeff in Slick Sleuths. What can you tell us about Mutt and Jeff?
Mutt and Jeff are or were an incredibly famous early comic strip series, the newspaper comics. And these are characters that by the mid-teens or early 20s, almost everyone alive looking at newspapers or comics would have known who these characters are and would have been very aware of them and probably fans of them. And the Mutt and Jeff series, and as far as animation goes, was an example of the newspaper magnates, people involved in syndicating comics, wanting to take their very lucrative comic strip characters and translating them onto the screen, and really just finding a new avenue of profitability for them.
Sure.
I think it worked well because people already knew the characters, so certainly I think they would have responded well to seeing them on the screen and not just in print. I would say the Mutt and Jeff cartoons were pretty well made at that time and pretty popular. They are mischievous characters, and they always get into these very silly, ridiculous situations. So they're a lot of fun to watch, and a couple of fun twists in the Slick Sleuths films that we saw here.
There was the one moment when the Phantom turned into Charlie Chaplin type character, and it kind of brought to the front of my mind, like, obviously in early silent comedy, you have a lot of gags, right? And in cartoons are known for gags, even to the point where now if something's has too many gags in it, we say, oh, that's so cartoonish, you know? I mean, my guess would be a lot of that's from both of those genres. A lot of that's derived from vaudeville. But what would you say about, like, I guess the influence of silent comedy on cartoons, or vice versa, and maybe the connection they may have to vaudeville?
I would say both early silent comedy and slapstick humor definitely derived from vaudeville in some respect, and stage acting and pantomime, all these kinds of classical type of performances. Animation, especially at that time, was heavily influenced by this, and we know this for two reasons. Some of the early animators themselves were vaudeville performers. Winsor McKay and James Stewart Blackton, who we mentioned, they both had careers in performing on the stage in vaudeville circuits and doing lightning sketches and chalk talks. So they were already aware of interacting with live audiences this way, and seeing how live humor on the stage impacts audiences. So I think a lot of these early animators were keeping that in mind from that background, but also there were animators who spoke later on in later years about how they would get clips of films of Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd and people like that, and they would study them frame by frame, and they would look at the way Chaplin would contort his body and move around and perform a sight gag and that sort of thing. So there is definitely a definite direct inspiration from the world of silent comedy, and all of this, I think, kind of funneling back to vaudeville originally.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially considering that most of those early comedians were vaudevillians. Heck, I mean, most film actors up until the 1930s were vaudevillians.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But yeah, so the next up was Pete's Haunted House. And I'll just say real quick, first of all, I enjoyed this one, I think, the most because it was so whimsical, and it kind of reminded me of, like, Mr. Rogers and how he had his little friends, you know, in the kingdom and everything. But unlike Mr. Rogers, this guy is kind of sadistic, and he's not very nice to Pete.
You've brought up more for me to say than I thought I would say now, for a few reasons. I happen to be a very big lifelong fan of Mr. Rogers, and there's a huge contrast here. There's similarities, but there's a huge contrast.
Yes.
Here because most people of a certain age are familiar with Mr. Rogers and his fun, cute little house and all these little activities. And we would expect something like a dollhouse to be sitting around there. And with the segments he has in his other world with the puppets and everything.
Yeah.
In a way, it's inspired again, I would think, by vaudeville to some extent, and what people were doing with animation too. But what's interesting is that there's a lot to unpack here with what you brought up, because I think the general understanding of, let's say, child psychology has evolved over the decades. And when you're watching media from 100 years ago, anything that has any sort of appeal to children is created and comes off in a very different way than what we might have seen in the last 20 to 30 or 40 years now.
Right.
We have a lot of violence and sadism. People think that this is a modern problem in animation, but it goes way back to the beginning. So you see all this sadistic behavior, and especially with Max Fleischer and Coco the Clown, they're always at odds with one another and creating problems for one another. So
right.
Pete's this cute little dog. I'm sure a lot of children loved that character, and all of a sudden he's being terrorized, and he's probably going to be traumatized by the 7-minute period in his life. Well,
yeah, but then it ended up like a Roadrunner Coyote or like a Tom and Jerry situation at the end with Pete turning the tables, which I thought was great.
Absolutely. So that's one upside to that story.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me, really, in bringing up Mr. Rogers again, is that most television show hosts for children would include animation in their programs, and Mr. Rogers was not. Fred Rogers, I should say, was not a fan of cartoons. He felt that they were crude and rude and not beneficial in a lot of what they were showing to the psychological development of children. So he really diverges from that whole world. So Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, would not have felt probably as appreciative of that Walter Lantz cartoon as we.
Right. I'd imagine not. Finally, we have Felix the cat in Sherlock Holmes. Felix was, from what I know, Felix was the biggest cartoon star of his time, right?
Absolutely. For a lot of different reasons. We selected a Felix cartoon that I would say comes from the period in the 20s when the character had been as well developed and as fine-tuned as he ever would have been during that period, in terms of the way he was designed visually and the character development, the personality behind this character. It's a fun and surreal, it's a strange short, not only because it fits into this spooky Halloween theme, but the way that it plays with so many silhouettes and our imagination and things that we're worried about or afraid of in the dark. It's kind of deep in a way, in just pantomime. And I think Felix was so successful, so popular, because of the fact that it's a cute cat. I mean, 100 years later, what do people spend all day doing but sending each other pictures of cats, right? So it made complete sense to have a character like this that children and adults would like. And it was designed in a way that was rather easy to animate by that point. All these round shapes and completely opaque. So the animators had fun with it, and the audiences loved it. Felix the cat is really the first character to be merchandised. So go into a department store or a drugstore, and you could buy merchandise with this character's face on it. This broke new ground and really revolutionized the animation industry. It's not only are we seeing films that we like on the screen, but we can start to, I think, feel more connected with the characters and attached to them. We can actually buy their likeness as dolls and toys and products and have them in our homes with us. So
right,
we owe any sort of character licensing in animation. We owe a lot to Felix and how that was handled at that time. So you see by the top of this program and that Felix short, kind of the culmination of the greatness of silent era animation. So I think
Right.
that's an appropriate choice.
Well, you mentioned merchandising, makes me think of Mickey Mouse, of course, the most merchandised character of all time. And I read an anecdote or a quote, something about like people are just surprised to discover there was actually silent animation, or that there was animation before Steamboat Willie.
So many people out there, I think, generally understand animation to originate with Mickey Mouse or Disney, and it's such a misunderstanding of an art form that was, and a business that predated all that by 15, 20 years. The number of animated films made before Mickey Mouse is in, I believe, the low thousands, and that's a lot. Felix is one of several from the early world of animation that were very famous, popular, but for a variety of reasons, they have not been in use constantly, or in projects that a lot of people are seeing and getting to love and that sort of thing. So it's a distinction that really only the Disney company and the Warner Brothers Animation have, with an ongoing, steady legacy of their characters. Everyone else is in more of a gray area with that.
Right. A patchwork over time. So you told me a little bit about the Cartoon Carnival. So real quick, like if I came to a Cartoon Carnival screening in New York City, what would I see? What would I hear?
What we do is show 2 sets of 16 millimeter cartoons. So I'll have my film projector there, and in advance I've spliced together about 90 minutes worth of cartoons, and they're on 2 separate reels. So we take a break in the middle. We have an intermission, and I program the show according to that theme that we chose, and we just see how it goes. And it's usually quite a trip, quite an adventure. I think it's a lot of fun. It's not a classroom. It's not overly academic. It's not like a lot of repertory screenings where we have really dry introductions for everything.
Right.
It's more of a sit back and relax kind of thing, with a little bit of a Pee-wee's Playhouse feel to it too.
I was about to mention Pee-wee's Playhouse earlier when we were talking about Mr. Rogers and Pete the dog.
2 very different people, but yeah.
Well, in relation to Pete's Haunted House, because, there was some Pee-wee in there too.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Where can people go? Like, obviously our audience would love your shows. So where can they go to watch those?
They can go to my website, cartoonsonfilm.info, and I have a page there for the Cartoon Carnival series. I have some of the past online shows archived where they could be viewed pay-per-view, and there's a bit of general information there about what I do. I also have a YouTube channel, Cartoons on Film, so people can see trailers for shows there and other things I've done. So there's definitely an online presence for this.
Well, Tommy, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for helping us out with this program, for letting us know about the Cartoon Carnival and all the work you're doing. I know I speak for all our viewers and myself when I say it's been really great talking with you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure of mine, and thank you to all of your audience members also for, I hope, enjoying this and being with us.
Thank you all of you out there for joining us tonight for another Retroformat Live Q&A. We're always happy to have you here. And if you enjoyed tonight's performance or Q&A, please consider making a donation to Retroformat Films by visiting retroformat.org/donate. Your support really does mean the world to us. That's all for tonight. Make sure and join us in another couple weeks for the next Silent Movie Mondays. I'm your host, Sean P. Malone. Thanks for watching.